A sudden thrashing from the vegetation near the water's edge wasn't just a small animal. It was the start of a nightmare for a small village. A grandmother working in the fields found herself face to face with a 16-foot python, a predator that had just found its prey. As the snake wrapped its massive coils around her, a display of unimaginable crushing power, there was nothing anyone could do. A reticulated python has incredible strength, an ambush hunter's instinct, and more than enough force to crush a human being. When it took a grandfather from their village, the local mob decided it was time to deliver their own justice. June 14th, late afternoon, on the edge of a palm smallholding south of Padang, Sumatra. The air ran thick. Heat clung. Humidity pressed on the lungs. The ditch along the plantation road held slow brown water, skins of oil from palm fruit runoff slicking the surface. Mosquitoes hammered bare wrists. Cicadas buzzed like faulty wiring. The light dropped fast behind clouds that stacked and bruised. "We get this last shot and we're out," Safri said, grinning, breathing hard from the slog. He was 32, a field cameraman who liked the rush, the hit of a clean angle. He ran lean, too sure of his feet. He kept telling me he could read animal sign. He kept stepping off the road. "It's just ground," he said. "You see it, you step back." He said it like a rule. He said it like a dare. There'd been a warning. A palm cutter with a rag around his head waved us off the ditch. "Ular," he said, frowning. "Snake." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He pointed with his chin where the drainage narrowed and the scrap water pooled. We heard a peafowl clack deep in the trees, alarm sharp and short. Safri squinted. "Birds lose it over everything," he said. He dropped his pack and hopped the ditch to frame the low ground from the other side, chasing the dramatic line of mud, his boot sinking, sucking. I stayed on the shoulder, camera bag on my back, heart already picking up in my throat. The palm cutter watched without moving. He let out a thin breath that smelled like clove smoke and said, "Jangan, don't," but softer, like to himself. Reticulated pythons can pass 20 feet and 200 pounds, thick as a man's thigh. They aren't venomous. They don't need to be. They anchor with more than 100 backward curved teeth and turn the whole body into a tourniquet. Coils lock. Chest can't move. Circulation fails fast. They hunt near water margins and pig paths, holding in weeds, heat-sensing pits reading the glow of warm-blooded bodies against cool mud. Nights and crepuscular hours are their ambush hours. They go for the head and trunk to fix the package before it fights back. They don't chase. They wait. They excel at waiting. The ditch looked quiet. Low mud banks, water at shin depth, leaf litter stalled in the bend. Then, a subtle line. A slide in the grass where heavy weight had traced a lazy S. Safri saw it and stepped toward it, eyes on the pale smear, not on the pool where the weeds made a black mouth. He loved the shot more than the ground. He always did. "Hold on," I said. "That's slick." He cut me off. "I got it," he said. 2 minutes. He crouched for the angle, knee in muck, hand on a palm root. He liked to be first in. He liked to be close. He kept edging the lens toward the water face. My mouth went dry. The peafowl sounded again. Short. Angry. From a python's view, there is no scene, no narrative, only gradients. Warm and cold. Motion. And still. The silhouette ahead broke the edge of the ditch, a shape that leaned and breathed. A heat source larger than a civet, less broad than a boar. Upright. The water carried scent salt and chemical, human skin and detergent, and the pressure waves of a boot heel, slow and heavy. The weeds filtered the noise into a steady pulse. Close enough. Coiled body loaded like a spring under mud and reed, head forward. Neck kinked for a launch arc measured not in thought, but in distance and muscle memory. There is no malice here, only timing. We didn't hear the water before the hit. Action outran sound. It surged like a pulled tarp and then it was on him. The head came out of the weeds and found thigh. Teeth set with a dry click I felt in my molars. He shouted, "Sharp." Instinct dragged his hand to the bite. The water jumped. Brown sheet. Then the body rose, not high, but enough to clear the bank, and the first coil slid for his legs. Everything went tight. The ditch thumped. The palm cutter moved, 2 steps, then froze. "Safri!" I yelled. "Back! Drop the pack!" Stupid words. He didn't hear. Or, he did, but the message had no time. Slow it. Freeze the frame. The head pins, teeth like fish hooks sunk in fabric and skin, angling and holding. His knee goes. Weight shifts. Center of mass tilts over mud. The second loop lands high, a wet rope hauled by living winch. It erases space between it and the trunk of him. The coil turns. The coil closes. Cloth creaks. He grunts. Not pain. Air leaving. The ditch water bulges, displaced in a smooth ring, then slaps back. Sound lags that slap by a beat, off sync, like a bad dub. My brain tries to catch up, and fails. Moving. Static. Moving. He grabbed for the head and met glassy eye, cool and flat. Face scales shining with ditch scum. He jammed fingers along the jaw hinge, digging for leverage, mud filing his nails. "Get off me!" He spat, voice thin. He shoved. Teeth held. You don't rip out. You push in to unhook. He didn't know that. He pulled reflexively, and the bite set deeper into fabric. He lost that second. A second is the whole game. The loop lifted his hips and rotated him into the ditch bed. He hit root and slid. Another coil came across his lower back. The python worked like a machine that never learned mercy. It didn't need to. "Stick!" I yelled, stupid again, hunting the ground for something long. Anything hard. I found a snapped palm frond and sloshed forward, feet gone loose in flat mud. The water stank of rotten metal. The cutter barked, "Jangin, Jangin!" His hands hovered, unsure. Training says, wedge something hard between coils to buy space. Get hands to the head. Go for the eyes. Keep the airway free. Don't let the first wrap close your arms. Don't end up prone. Don't fight alone. We were breaking every rule. Safri kicked, found slick weed, and heaved his torso up. The python adjusted without any hurry. A steady turn that brought the loop over his ribs. Pressure climbed. He made a sound like a laugh, but it wasn't. "I'm good," he said. Tight. The rest fell off. He shoved the frond across his chest, trying to keep space. I got a hand to the animal's neck, and it didn't feel like a neck. It felt like a loaded cable. I pushed. Nothing. The scale edges were fine. The muscles didn't tremble. They just shifted force, quiet and absolute. "Get the tail!" I shouted. "Pull the tail!" It lay in water, patterned like shadow, hard to see. The cutter stepped to it and grabbed. He pulled to unwind from the end. Good move. He slid. The tail slid with him, alive and smooth, and snapped from his hands like wet rope. He fell. Safri tried for a breath. None came. His words were soft now. "Don't let it," he said. And then he was out of words. We never saw the full length. We saw sections. It didn't lunge again. It only kept tightening with each exhale. The water boiled around us and settled. I swung the frond at the face. Useless. It blinked its clear eye cap. I put my thumbs for the eyes and missed, sliding on scum, and I hated the feel of that cold, steady head. You want the head. You stop the head. But you can't stop what isn't stopping you. It is just doing what it does. Rangers reached us when the sky went purple. They cut the coils with machetes, starting at tail, working to the core. They moved calm, calling counts, 1, 2, 3, to time the pull. It took minutes. It felt like a day. They pried it off his chest and torso. They kept the head pried with a forked stick. The mouth let go in a wet stringing of fabric. No blood on the surface I could see, only torn cloth and rows of neat punctures, each dark dot the size of a pencil eraser. The skin there already puffed with the rush of fluid. His face was empty of color. His eyes were half-lidded. He lay too quiet. I put my hand on his shoulder and felt heat, then felt it fade. He didn't speak again. They found his cap downstream the next day in a snag of roots, striped with mud and a smear of musk that stung the nose. That cap became the whole case in my mind. Not the phone buried in the ditch, not the pack crushed flat at the strap. The cap. I still smell the musk in my sleep. The investigators measured the slide marks on the bank, the spread of coil tracks, the width across scales, over a foot at the thickest point, over 20 feet long by their best guess. The bite pattern on the pants showed an odd offset, like the head had a kink near the jaw, an old break maybe. A ranger said he'd seen a python with a healed jaw once that hunted at roads more than swamp. It compensates, he said. We weren't sure what that meant for us. We were already down in it. Herpetologist briefed us after. If you're near water margins at dusk in python country, keep off the edge. 2 steps back from any weed-choked bend. Walk in twos. Carry a stout stick and probe ahead of you. If bitten, don't yank out. Push forward to disengage teeth. Then get hands to the head. If wrapped, get something hard between coil and ribs. Don't go to ground. Partners should unwind from the tail, not the middle. Eyes are vulnerable. Water poured on the head can trigger a release. If it drags you toward cover, hook your legs to something and make noise. The python doesn't love a fight, it loves leverage. Deny that. The official write-up said what they all say. Human in the wrong place at the wrong hour. Large female python ambushes at water's edge. Constriction. Respiratory failure. But even the rangers kept glancing at the ditch bend afterward, scanning it like it might look back. They found no big puffed body sunning in the mornings after, no fresh shed skin draped on roots, no half-swallowed pig hung up in the reeds. Just the old track loops and a new scrape, where something heavy turned and eased away rather than bolt, like it had waited and watched us leave. Why would an ambush hunter hold that long near footfall and voice? Why that bend, that day? Maybe it had fed on dogs dumped near that road. Maybe it had learned the clock of field workers. Maybe it had a broken jaw and compensated with bolder setups. We don't know. Here's the part that sits wrong. It didn't flee when men shouted. It adjusted. If you had walked up on the scene right after, you'd have seen a man laid flat on the road shoulder with his shirt torn, chest and abdomen ringed with deep, even bands that looked like bruises drawn by a ruler, purple rising under skin as if painted from inside. You'd have seen neat lines of tiny dots along a thigh where the teeth had held, fabric fibers pushed into each. You'd have seen a slick on the mud where the coils wore a smooth trail, scales polished with ditch film. You'd have smelled musk that bit deep in the sinuses and stuck to your tongue. You wouldn't need a doctor to tell you how the animal did it. The method stamped itself in the pattern the body left. People like to make lessons out of this. Stay back, obey warnings, respect edges. All true, sure. But here, the lesson is smaller and worse. That python didn't break character. It refined it. It found a bend that trained us to ignore it. It used mud as a cloak and patience as a tool. It's still out there on some other ditch in some other late hour, not hunting men as a rule, but not avoiding us either. It will wait under the weeds, reading heat and ripple, and it will act when mass crosses margin. When do we admit that the memory we carry of a voice saying, "It's just ground. You see it. You step back," isn't a shield? It's a sound the water will swallow, and still the surface won't even shake.